Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is a game from the 2004 Reykjavik Rapid between Magnus Carlsen and Garry Kasparov. This was their very first encounter. Carlsen, still 13 years old and an international master at the time, 2484 FIDE rating, and Kasparov having a rating of 2831 at the time. So let's dive right in here. Again, Carlsen on the white end playing d4, Kasparov responding d5, and we get right into the Cambridge Springs defense, which is denoted by the move queen to a5, which is doing a few things. First and foremost, getting out of a pin. Secondly, placing white in a pin. And you might as well start to already view the queen doing a third thing, namely functioning laterally, because at any moment there could be this capture d takes c. And in many instances, it could be netting black some material. I'll touch on that in a little bit from now. But before I get to it, let me point out that if this happens to be an opening you play as white or black, there is a neat little trap, I guess you could say, that could come about. But it shows itself with the slightly tweaked move order. So let me just touch on that very quickly. And it runs with, after c4, we're not having c6, but rather e6, knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5, and knight here. So we're looking at, again, a similar position, but the difference here is that the moves knight f3 and c6 are absent. And the thing to be cautious of as white is to really resist the temptation to go ahead and win a pawn, because you're not winning a pawn in the following way. This is actually falling for what's known as the elephant trap, where after white takes on this square, trying to exploit this pin, black could simply ignore it. And it's a very, very temporary queen sack, black getting the white queen back just a couple moves later, and after the smoke is cleared, black is simply up a knight. This, of course, is not going to happen in the high-level games, but something to certainly be aware of should you already have this as part of your own opening repertoire as, again, white or black. So getting back on with the actual game, after this queen a5 move, white takes immediate action against this pin, breaking it with knight to d2, and also watching over this e4 square. Either one of these knights is now able to watch over that e4 square. And this is already a very important detail, because if white is just going to be running with a very natural looking type of move, such as bishop to d3, preparing to castle, watching over the e4 square, black could still just throw that knight into that e4 square, adding more fuel to that c3 knight, pressure on the bishop. And there is an interesting sequence of moves. If it gets to be too much on the white end and white wants to remove one of the attackers of that c3 square with bishop takes knight, well, now we have d takes e, which is clearing this fifth rank for that black queen. So knight e5 is pretty much the only move to save that bishop. And then we kind of get into a little bit of a wacky variation here, where after f6, we could have queen to h5, g6, knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes rook, queen takes bishop, and this is a really weird imbalance. But black is actually the side that's going to stand better, even though it seems like their king is a little bit shaky. The queen alone is not going to be enough to disrupt that black king's position. If we were to take it a couple moves further, pretty much have this situation right here, where these bishops are going to be ready to just strike at that white king very soon. The bishop coming out maybe to this diagonal, the other bishop making use of this diagonal, and the queen is a difficult piece to be chasing off of these very weak light squares on the white side. So again, just be aware of that third detail when the queen does play to a5 here. Again, off of the diagonal, functioning on this one, and the lateral movement shows itself in many variations. So knight d2, breaking the pin, bishop b4, persistent on this c3 point. Queen to c2, lending support. Black castles, bishop e2 and e5. So striking at the white center right here with this e5 move, and at a later point looking to develop this bishop. However, in this game, that bishop really does just sit on that c8 square for some time. In fact, it doesn't even move until move 29. So there's quite a bit of stuff that goes on before this bishop moves, and well, actually even that rook as well. So bishop has to move before this guy can get out of the corner. So there is an important detail right here, and it's once again focused on this lateral movement. The difference between e2 and d3 is really the whole game, really, because if you play here, there we go. Game over. Can you believe it? Believe it, because we have the bishop hit and this bishop hit. And there is no in-between move for white because black says, no, my in-between move is even stronger, taking the bishop, being on the queen, and only then recapturing. And we once again have a situation where black is just up a minor piece. So the difference between bishop to d3 and bishop to e2, as was played in the game, is a very significant one. So e5, striking in the center, white now fully developed. That's noted by a direct connection between those rooks. Takes, knight b3, hitting the queen. And when I initially saw this, okay, queen goes back to b6. When I initially saw this, I thought, okay, the knight pivoted there, hitting the queen, and then would be recapturing. And I guess this is maybe a somewhat solid approach to it, not having to cope with an isolated queen pawn type of position, which is the type of structure we end up having to work with on the white end here. So we'll see how that shows itself. What's also important to note is that if in this situation knight takes pawn was played and the bishop takes the knight, again, be aware of this knight pivot to the e4 square. If queen takes, then this is big trouble. So white would be needing to capture with the pawn in that instance. But we don't have the recapture on this square right here with that b3 knight, but rather e takes d. And after d takes c, bishop takes c, there we have it. Isolated queen pawn. And so this is a dynamic advantage here for white. White is looking to maybe press forward in the center at some point, change the pawn structure, and show show that this lead in development that white has is going to prove useful, prove to be actually an advantage. So we have a5 and then a4. This is a very typical idea to be aware of. Knights that find themselves on b3, b6, g6, g3 are often chased away with these rook pawns. It often becomes very difficult for that knight to have a good reaction to a threat when the rook pawns come down to attack it. So white stops that cold with a4. And I think that this is a little bit of an uncomfortable move to have to make. I really do like this a5 move after a4, because now this is a hole. This bishop is able to kind of just sit there, and maybe one day one of these knights, let's say the one on d7, could somehow make use of that square as well. So there is a little bit of a concession, but the main point is to preserve this knight's position for the time being. So queen back c7, functioning on this diagonal right now, that h2 point. Rook to e1, getting it doing something. The bishop gets kicked around, bishop d6, and now h3. And then, okay, knight to b6. Now, at this point, I was actually, when I first reviewed it, I was looking at g5, and then I'm like, well, where is the compensation exactly? Where is this compensation? And it completely slipped my mind that, hey, what do we have going on here? This is something I should have been thinking all the while. This pawn is pinned, and a pinned piece is a powerless one. This could be a deadly check. In fact, it would just be a winning shot at this very early stage. As soon as g5 is played, just boom, check, take, check. Knight blocks, grab another pawn, the position's crumbling, the king is dead. So just be aware of that bishop on c4. In fact, you might as well already, in your own internal dialogue, in your own thinking when you're playing the game, as soon as this bishop makes the capture on c4, you might as well just start saying, okay, that pawn is pinned. And maybe there's a way to be making use of it. You know, maybe you could be making use of this square right now. It's not super clear where you could be doing that in this case just yet, but definitely at this point right here, as soon as h6 is played, you could be making use of that square one day. Anyhow, bishop back, bishop d6, h3, knight b6, hitting the bishop, and this is definitely one of those positions where black has to come up with something, because it's really a case where black is in a giant knot. Because look at these queenside pieces, they're just spectators. What are they doing? And what is this knight doing? It's a complete domino effect, really. If this knight can't move, this bishop can't move. And if this bishop can't move, this rook can't do anything. And the sad thing is that if this knight does move, it does move in the game, it goes to b6, but because of the pressure, this is what I'm getting at, because of the pressure that white has against this knight, it just kind of bottles up this whole queenside. Its influence is a tremendous one. So we have both sides basically going into a pretty big think here. Well, really, Kasparov at this point. Knight b6, because we have a couple captures going on here. There's not just this typical capture and then recapture stuff going on. No, we have, after bishop takes on f6, knight takes c4, and white doesn't react to the threat on the bishop, but rather knight to e4, counterattacking move, centralizing the knight, hitting the bishop, and also hitting this knight right here. Black responds first, inserting a check, king h1 only move, and now this is where there is maybe a slight improvement on the black end, because now it's white who really dictates the game and obtains a very strong initiative. And in fact, throughout this whole game, white was never worse off. White was always slightly better. And now things become even worse for black. In the game, we saw knight d6, and the continuation was king takes bishop, which is welcoming one of these, it's welcoming one of these very devastating moves, one of these discovered checks, but it's not so devastating in this instance right here. After knight captures on e4, we have just the counterattacking bishop to e5, and unfortunately, black is having to work themselves back into a pin in order to preserve that knight. The alternative is to not play knight d6, but rather b5, maintaining this knight's position. And I believe white would soon be having to react to just this pawn takes bishop move. But we don't have that. b5 was not played. The knight actually reacts to that queen threat. Knight d6, working again themselves, Carlsen working himself into a pin right here, or a discovered attack. Knight takes, bishop back, knight d6, and here we go. If one of the pieces is in a pin, what do? You add fuel to it. Queen c5, two pieces hitting, and again, white is dictating the game from here. Has the initiative, in other words. d5, throwing punches at white, hitting at c6, vacating d4. The knight is looking to centralize itself. All the while, these two, again, are still just camping out here on the queen side, not doing a thing. So queen to d7, a natural reaction to being in a pin, get out of it. Knight d4, more pressure on c6, and knight to f5. An important point is this one right here. In fact, if you want to stop the video and see what would you do in this instance right here, again, if you'd like to pause the video, what would be the winning continuation for white in this position? Okay, the sequence of moves which would absolutely kill black is just to take the knight. And then at the end of it, we're having this check, and then again, not the first time we're seeing this idea, piling up on the pinned piece. The pinned piece is the bishop, it's dead, and so too will be that black king soon enough. So, in other words, c takes d, don't do it. Knight f5 instead. D takes c on the queen. B takes c, knight takes pawn, white is up a pawn, the knight is within checking distance, hitting the rook. Things are very uncomfortable for black. Again, these guys, a couple clowns right here on the queen side. Rook to e8 in the meantime. Rook d1, queen e6, and we have rook f to e1, which is a very natural looking move. It's very human-like to be making this type of move. It's just tidying everything up, centralizing these rooks, and now we just have all of the white pieces functioning. However, the improvement is going to be this move right here, which is, well, I guess not so human-like because it's not harmonious. The pieces, this bishop right now on that c7 square is not protected. When there's this rook f to e1 move, again, everything is nice and cozy here. Everything is defended. The rook's guarding one another, controlling all these central squares. But this bishop to c7 move would have been the more accurate thing to do. I was, I'm not aware of what the time constraints were, or what the time controls were at that very moment. But what is this move doing? It's just adding what is now a third attacker to that a5 pawn, and if that goes, we're going to have these pawns right here, these connected past a and b pawns. That's going to be a very strong thing. So it was not played. Instead, again, rook f to e1, and finally, move 29, we're having that queen bishop do something. So it throws itself on a very good diagonal, the main light square diagonal, and now we have the knight coming back. We have this fork going on, and actually, even though white is up a pawn, there's not really going to be a way to convert it. In fact, this endgame just kind of goes to nothing right here. It gets to a position where white really can't make use of that extra pawn because it's in large part to these guys being on opposite colors. Opposite color bishops will often translate into a draw, and this position right here is no exception. So we just have a lot of logical moves just going on here. The meeting of one move threats, attack of the pawn, defense of the pawn, that sort of stuff. Additionally, when this bishop was threatened right here with f6, what do you want to do? You want to react but still be aggressive in some way. So that's why it's coming to that c3 square. So the rooks come off, the rook defends, the kings improve their position. This is an endgame. The kings need to be doing stuff. And now the bishop is looking to make sure this pawn doesn't get out of control. a5, bishop back, f3, and you'll notice it's not by chance that we're having right here on both sides these sorts of structures. You really don't want to be too careless right here with, let's say, white making a move like f4. I'm sure it's still okay, but it's kind of allowing for maybe the bishop to get on this diagonal and maybe the rook one day being able to get on this second rank and easily converge on that g2 square. However, if this type of structure is maintained, the pawns on f3 and g2, and similarly g6 and f6, both structures are combating or taking into account the opposing bishops and how they could maybe be putting pressure on the base points g7 and g2. So just a quick point to be making. This does turn out to just be a draw. We have rook to h1 getting out of this pin. If there is any chance for a win on the white end, they're needing to keep the rooks on the board. And so that's why we're having white throwing a check. The king goes back. The bishop plays to c5. The rook now has the opportunity to get to this active second rank and get behind the passed pawn. This is the ideal placement for a rook defending against a passed pawn. You would like to get it behind the pawn. The king goes back to g3, defense. Rook a2, bishop b6, king f7, rook c1, getting this pawn involved, guarding some dark squares against that white king. Rook check, king g6, rook c6, placing the king in a pin, or that pawn in a pin, maybe looking for bishop to d4, but now white could put pressure on this pawn right here, and white just defends by playing bishop to f2, and a draw was agreed at this point. So 13-year-old Magnus Carlsen drawing the legendary Garry Kasparov. Really, really incredible thing to have happen. There is nothing more at this point. I was wondering if there was something like bishop to d4, but something as calm as rook to a6, and there's nothing to do. This is definitely a drawn position, but as it was in this game, after bishop to f2, both players agreed to a draw. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it. Take care. Bye.